His friend Fridtjof Nansen said about this traveler, "Some explosive power dwelt in him. He was not a scientist, yet he did not want to be a scientist. He was attracted to feats." This man was blamed for the thirst for sensations and longing for being first in everything. But in pursuit for records, the tireless polar researcher Roald Amundsen made important geographical discoveries and became the pride of Norwegian people. He was born in 1872 in the city of Borge. His father was a hereditary sailor and a shipyard owner. Since childhood, Roald dreamed of sea. One day, having read a book about wintering and tragic death of polar researcher John Franklin, 15-year-old Roald decided to become a polar traveler. He had read lots of books and travel notes of conquerors of the North, studied values and defects of different types of polar equipment, clothes, and feeding. Upon his mother's insistence, Amundsen entered the medical faculty at the University of Oslo, but he gave up studies after her death. At 22, he got a job as the cabin boy on a ship, and at 27, he became a sea captain and participated in the Belgian Antarctic expedition. But the preparations for the expedition were not done with utmost care. As a result, the winterers got scurvy, and one of them died. Amundsen realized for his life how much detailed preparation for the march was important. Towards the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries, the polar researchers had mainly cut out 3 tasks for themselves: to find the Northwest Passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, to reach the North and South Poles. Amundsen decided to begin with the thing that Franklin and other 57 expeditions didn't manage to achieve: to find the Northern Seaway. The preparation of the expedition lasted 3 years. Nothing can prove its value better than time spent for the selection of expedition members, Amundsen loved to repeat. He selected 7 experienced and hardy sailors. Foresight and caution are of equal importance. Foresight is for noticing difficulties in time. Caution is for being prepared in the most thorough way to meet them, Amundsen considered. Only a small ship could pass the narrow, shallow fairway among the multiple islands of the northern coast of America, and Amundsen chose the sailboat Gjøa. Roald Amundsen was the first who passed from Greenland to Alaska through the straits of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. The expedition returned in 1906, having taken a lot of material on meteorology, ethnography, and geomagnetic phenomena. Norwegian scientists had been processing these data for 20 years. Amundsen defined the next goal: to conquest the North Pole. He wanted to reach the Bering Strait, and then, when the ship froze into ice there, to drift along with ices northward, as it had been done before by the traveler Nansen. Nansen gave Amundsen his ship called Fram that was fit for drift in northern waters. But while they were preparing for the expedition, the North Pole was conquered by the American Robert Peary. Amundsen felt himself as if he was ripped off, and he secretly changed the purpose of the expedition. After putting out in June 1910, it was only in the Atlantic when Amundsen informed his crew that the ship was heading to the South Pole. At the same time, Robert Scott, an Englishman, set out to conquer the pole. But Amundsen appeared to be better prepared for the expedition. He even made exact calculations of the days when, because of the shortage of food, dogs would turn from means of transportation into food for the remaining dogs and people. Amundsen came only 33 days earlier than Scott. On December 17, 1911, the Norwegian flag was lifted over the South Pole. Norway welcomed Amundsen as a national hero. His portrait adorned every house. The researcher began to collect money for the next journey, and in 1920, he passed the northeastern way from Norway to Bering Strait. But Amundsen never abandoned his dream to get to the North Pole, this time by air. At 53, he learned to navigate an airplane. The first flight from Spitsbergen to the pole turned out to be a failure, but that did not discourage the researcher. A year later, in May 1926, he repeated the attempt, this time on airship. The flight from Spitsbergen to Alaska through the North Pole on the airship called Norge lasted for 75 hours. This man's energy, courage, and organizing capacity helped him succeed in all his expeditions. Contemporaries spoke of his art of the polar studies, but Amundsen himself considered his voyages as routine job. Collecting money for the flight, Amundsen confided in magnate Armand Hammer, but went bankrupt and had to pay the debts. During his last years, he earned his livelihood by reading reports and writing books. Amundsen led a simple life. He cleaned the house, cooked, did the laundry himself. But he was not destined to lead a peaceful life at old age. On June 18, 1928, Amundsen flew a seaplane called Latham to search for the crew of Umberto Nobile's airship, which had crashed in the Arctic. This flight became the last for the Norwegian traveler. He lived to be 56. The famous polar researcher Roald Amundsen described his impressions in fascinating books such as The First Crossing of the Polar Sea, The Northwest Passage, The South Pole, and others. The mountain in Antarctica and the bay in the Arctic Ocean were named after Amundsen.